The year was 1939, a year that stood on the edge of an abyss. The sound of marching boots echoed through Europe, and the smell of fear drifted through the corridors of every embassy, newsroom, and government hall. Across the continent, people sensed that something irreversible was about to begin, a storm that no nation could escape. In Berlin, banners hung like bloodied curtains over the streets. The red flags with black swastikas fluttered proudly under the summer sun, while Adolf Hitler's speeches thundered across radios and loudspeakers. Germany must expand, he declared. Germany must reclaim what was taken from her. His voice, a strange mix of fervor and fury, resonated with a country still humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. But Germany was not alone in its ambitions. Across Europe, powers were maneuvering, each pretending to defend peace while secretly preparing for war. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain clung desperately to the illusion of diplomacy. He still believed that reason could restrain the ambitions of dictators. Peace for our time, he had promised, holding up that infamous piece of paper signed with Hitler in Munich just a year before. But history was already mocking him. The year was 1939, a year that stood on the edge of an abyss. The sound of marching boots echoed through Europe, and the smell of fear drifted through the corridors of every embassy, newsroom, and government hall. Across the continent, people sensed that something irreversible was about to begin, a storm that no nation could escape. In Berlin, banners hung like bloodied curtains over the streets. The red flags with black swastikas fluttered proudly under the summer sun, while Adolf Hitler's speeches thundered across radios and loudspeakers. Germany must expand, he declared. Germany must reclaim what was taken from her. His voice, a strange mix of fervor and fury, resonated with a country still humiliated by the Treaty of Versailles. But Germany was not alone in its ambitions. Across Europe, powers were maneuvering, each pretending to defend peace while secretly preparing for war. In London, Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain clung desperately to the illusion of diplomacy. He still believed that reason could restrain the ambitions of dictators. Peace for our time, he had promised, holding up that infamous piece of paper signed with Hitler in Munich just a year before. But history was already mocking him. In Moscow, Joseph Stalin played his own game, a game of survival and deceit. The Soviet Union was arming itself at a terrifying pace, but Stalin's paranoia ran deeper than his confidence. He purged his generals, executed his rivals, and trusted no one. Yet, behind his cold eyes, he was already thinking several moves ahead. The world thought the Soviets and Nazis were natural enemies. Stalin, however, was preparing a move that would shock them all. Meanwhile, in Paris, life went on with uneasy normalcy. Cafes were still full, and newspapers printed optimistic headlines. But French generals, sitting in smoke-filled rooms, were haunted by a single word: Verdun. The memory of World War I was still an open wound. The French army, vast and heavily fortified behind the Maginot Line, was strong in defense, but weak in imagination. They were preparing for the last war, not the next one. And across the Atlantic, the United States watched with cautious detachment. The Great Depression had scarred its people, and isolationist sentiment ran deep. President Franklin D. Roosevelt warned the danger was growing, but few listened. "They are a quarrelsome people," said many Americans about Europe. "Let them fight their own wars." The world was drifting toward catastrophe, step by step, speech by speech, lie by lie. It began quietly. In March 1939, German troops marched into Czechoslovakia, violating every promise Hitler had made. The world reacted with outrage, but not with action.
London and Paris sent diplomatic notes, not armies. Hitler watched and smiled. He had tested the West's resolve and found it weak. Then came the secret meetings, the coded messages, the clandestine pacts. In August 1939, something unthinkable happened. Germany and the Soviet Union, sworn ideological enemies, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty with a hidden clause dividing Eastern Europe into spheres of influence. When the pact was announced, the world gasped. How could Nazis and communists, sworn foes, stand side by side? But to Stalin, it was survival. To Hitler, it was strategy. The secret protocol gave the green light to what Hitler had been planning all along, the invasion of Poland. September 1st, 1939. At dawn, the sky over Westerplatte, Poland, turned red. German warships opened fire. Dive bombers screamed down from the clouds, tearing through the morning mist. In the distance, Polish soldiers, outnumbered, under-equipped, but not broken, fired back. The first battle of World War II had begun. Within hours, German tanks rolled across the Polish border under the doctrine of Blitzkrieg, the lightning war. It was a new kind of warfare, fast, coordinated, merciless. Tanks, planes, and infantry struck as one unstoppable fist. Poland's defenses crumbled within days. Civilians fled in panic, trains overloaded with refugees, roads clogged with carts and crying children. But Poland did not fight alone, at least on paper. On September 3rd, Britain and France declared war on Germany. Yet their armies did not move. Instead, they entered what history would call the phony war, a strange period of waiting where millions of soldiers stared across borders, but no major battles came. In those first weeks, Europe held its breath. The war had begun, but it felt unreal, like a nightmare just beginning to take form. While bombs fell over Poland, diplomats still whispered of peace. There were still those who believed that Hitler could be reasoned with, that perhaps after Poland he would stop. But Hitler had no intention of stopping. He spoke of destiny, of empire, of vengeance. Only through struggle, he told his generals, does a nation rise. In the Soviet Union, Stalin moved swiftly. On September 17th, Soviet forces invaded Poland from the east, fulfilling their secret pact with Germany. The two armies, Nazi and Soviet, met in the middle of Poland and shook hands. A photograph of smiling German and Soviet officers circulated around the world. It was an image of cynical alliance and of Europe's despair. By early October, Poland was gone. Warsaw lay in ruins. Over 200,000 civilians were dead. The world had entered a new age of mechanized death. The world reacts. In London, Chamberlain's voice trembled as he addressed the nation. "This country is at war with Germany." The words echoed through every radio in Britain, reaching living rooms where families sat in silence. Some wept. Others clenched their fists. Many remembered the last war and the millions it had taken. In Berlin, Hitler celebrated. Poland was conquered in just weeks. The generals who had doubted him now bowed in admiration. In his journal, Joseph Goebbels wrote, "The Führer is a genius. Europe will tremble before him." But beneath the triumph, shadows gathered. Hitler's generals knew that Britain and France were not yet defeated, and that the Führer's ambitions would soon drive them west. In the United States, Roosevelt listened to reports from Europe and sighed deeply. He understood what few in Congress wanted to hear, that America could not remain untouched by this storm forever. "We cannot escape history," he said quietly. "We will be remembered in spite of ourselves." By the end of 1939, Europe was a continent divided by fear and propaganda. Millions of men stood in trenches from the Baltic to the Rhine. Armies waited, politicians schemed, and civilians prayed. Winter came early that year. Snow covered the ruins of Warsaw. The streets of Paris were lit with dim lamps to save electricity. In Moscow, Stalin watched as German officers trained near the border, and he smiled. The smile of a man who believed he had outplayed everyone. But history was already moving faster than anyone could control. The world stood on the edge, and soon that edge would crumble into chaos. The world that had been trembling on the edge in 1939 now began to fall. Winter gave way to spring, and the silence that had haunted Europe, the so-called phony war, shattered like glass. In April 1940, without warning, German warships appeared off the coast of Norway. Paratroopers dropped over Oslo, and within days, Nazi flags flew above the fjords. The same fate befell Denmark, conquered in less than a day. The world realized that blitzkrieg was not a myth. It was a new kind of warfare, a storm of steel and speed that struck before an enemy could even react. In Berlin, Hitler's confidence grew with every victory. He believed he had solved the puzzle of modern war: mobility, surprise, and terror. His generals, men like Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, turned armored divisions into instruments of lightning. Tanks became thunderbolts. Airplanes became hammers. The Wehrmacht was the storm itself. May 1940, the Western Front ignites. On May 10, 1940, Germany struck west. At dawn, the roar of engines filled the skies over Belgium and the Netherlands. Paratroopers descended on bridges and airfields, cutting communications and sowing chaos. The French and British, expecting a repeat of 1914, rushed their best troops north to meet the German thrust through Belgium. But this time, it was a trap. While Allied forces moved north, the main German assault came through the Ardennes forest, a region French commanders had dismissed as impassable for tanks. In just 2 days, the German spearhead broke through, crossing the Meuse River at Sedan.
The blitzkrieg moved faster than radio reports. By the time Paris realized what was happening, German armor was already behind Allied lines. In one of history's cruelest ironies, the Allied armies, hundreds of thousands of men, were surrounded near the French coast. Trapped, desperate, they fell back to the small port of Dunkirk. The miracle of Dunkirk. Between May 26 and June 4, 1940, the British launched Operation Dynamo, an improvised evacuation that became legend. Every ship that could float, destroyers, fishing boats, merchant vessels, crossed the English Channel again and again under heavy fire. From the beaches of Dunkirk, over 338,000 soldiers were rescued. Photographs from that week show endless lines of men wading into the sea, their helmets glinting under German bombardment, smoke rising behind them like the end of the world. Hitler, strangely, halted his tanks just miles away from Dunkirk. Historians still debate why. Arrogance, miscommunication, or perhaps a twisted sense of mercy. But that hesitation would change everything. Britain lived to fight another day. As Churchill told the nation, "We shall fight on the beaches, we shall fight on the landing grounds, we shall fight in the fields and in the streets. We shall never surrender." His words echoed not just across Britain,
But across the world, the reprieve at Dunkirk could not save France. On June 14, 1940, Paris fell. German troops marched through the Arc de Triomphe, their boots striking the cobblestones in perfect rhythm. The City of Lights became a city of shadows. France was divided in two, the German-occupied north and the so-called Vichy regime in the south, ruled by Marshal Philippe Pétain. For many Frenchmen, it was humiliation beyond words. Across the sea, one defiant general, Charles de Gaulle, spoke from exile in London. France has lost a battle, but France has not lost the war. But for now, Europe lay under the iron heel of the Reich. Battle of Britain, the sky turns to fire. Now only one nation stood between Hitler and total domination of Western Europe, Britain. In the summer of 1940, the Luftwaffe prepared to crush it from the air. The plan was simple: destroy the Royal Air Force, bomb the cities, and pave the way for invasion. Operation Sea Lion was ready. The battle began in July 1940. At first, German pilots targeted radar stations and airfields. But when British bombers struck Berlin in retaliation, Hitler's fury turned to the cities themselves. London, Coventry, Liverpool. Night after night, the bombs fell. The Blitz had begun. Firestorms consumed whole streets. Families huddled in the underground tunnels as bombs thundered overhead. But even in ruin, the British spirit held. In the mornings, milkmen still delivered bottles through the rubble. The Union Jack still flew. And high above, in the blue skies of southern England, the RAF fought back. Young pilots, many barely 20 years old, clashed with the Luftwaffe in desperate dogfights. The world watched as the Battle of Britain unfolded, the first major campaign fought entirely in the air. In October 1940, Hitler finally blinked. The RAF had not been broken. The invasion was postponed indefinitely. Churchill's words immortalized the moment. Never in the field of human conflict was so much owed by so many to so few. The Axis expands. But Hitler was not done. While Britain endured the Blitz, the German war machine wooled south. Italy, under Benito Mussolini, joined the war, seeking its own empire in the Mediterranean. German divisions swept into Yugoslavia and Greece, crushing resistance. In North Africa, Rommel, the Desert Fox, led the Afrika Korps against British forces, mastering warfare in the endless sands. The map of Europe was drowning in red and black. By early 1941, from the Arctic to the Aegean, Hitler ruled or dominated almost every nation. But in his mind, one enemy remained, the one he hated most. To the east lay the Soviet Union, vast, brutal, and rich in resources. And in the summer of 1941, Hitler made his most catastrophic decision. On June 22, 1941, more than 3 million German soldiers, backed by 3,000 tanks and 2,000 aircraft, crossed the Soviet border. It was the largest invasion in human history. The code name was Operation Barbarossa. At dawn, the sky over the borderlands blazed with explosions. The Soviet armies, unprepared, disorganized, still reeling from Stalin's purges, were caught completely off guard. Entire divisions were encircled within days. By July, the Wehrmacht had advanced hundreds of kilometers. Cities fell one after another: Minsk, Smolensk, Kyiv. German generals believed victory was inevitable. They expected to reach Moscow before winter. Hitler himself declared, "We have only to kick in the door and the whole rotten structure will collapse." But the Soviet Union was not Poland, nor France. It was a continent in itself,
endless in size, merciless in spirit. The Turning Storm. As summer faded, the Germans pressed toward Moscow. They captured millions of prisoners, but behind them, the land they left burned. Soviet forces followed scorched earth orders, destroying crops, railways, anything of value. Then came the Russian winter. In December 1941, the temperature dropped to minus 30 degrees Celsius. Engines froze, weapons jammed. German soldiers wrapped themselves in stolen blankets and newspaper. The tanks, designed for blitzkrieg, sunk in snow and mud. And then the Red Army counterattacked. Fresh Soviet divisions, drawn from the Far East, struck back with fury. For the first time since the war began, Hitler's army retreated. The blitzkrieg had met its limit.